now. We ask you to use the chat to put any questions, and I will collect the questions in chat and then present them to our speaker at the end. As many of you know, the chat also turns out to be a great place to share information with each other, so feel free to use it for that purpose as well. Very shortly, I'm going to mute everyone so that we can be sure and hear our speaker clearly. And I am now going to pass the baton to Sue to talk about upcoming briefings. And first, actually, Sue, I'm going to mute everyone, and then you might have to unmute, okay? Okay.
Got it. Hi, I'm Sue Stark. I'm the co-director of program for League of Women Voters of Denver, and my pronouns are she and her. And we have these briefings monthly. They are open to anyone in the public, not just to members, and you are welcome to invite other people who are not members. You might encourage them to become members, but they're welcome to come at no charge. Our upcoming briefings in the next couple of months are on February 21st. We are going to take a look at Denver's preschool program. And in today's paper, there was an article about how people can sign their kids up for that. So this is a very timely topic. And on March 21st, we're going to have an update on the reproductive health care and abortion access, including possible legislation that may come up with our legislators this year, possibly a proposal for a constitutional amendment. It is also my honor to introduce our speaker tonight. Kyle Harris grew up in Liberty, Missouri, and as he says, bounced around before coming here from Chicago in 2005 to work as the acquisitions manager at Free Speech TV. He left that job in 2009 to teach film studies and production at Regis and at the Community College of Aurora, and to work on documenting the story of the underground syringe program of Denver and the fight to legalize syringe exchange programs in the city as part of the harm reduction approach to working with people who use drugs. After having a kid in 2013, and we can all identify with this, Kyle decided to shift to writing full-time and started freelancing. Soon he was hired as an associate editor and then managing editor at the Colorado Independent. He left that job for another stint as a freelancer and then worked as the culture editor at Westward, where he covered Denver's arts and music scene. After writing too many stories about artists being displaced from Denver, he decided to focus on covering growth and development in the city. He's been a longtime fan of the Denverite, and has been working as the news outlet as its senior reporter since October of 2021. There, he's covered new developments, the struggle for housing and childcare, the state of downtown Denver, and the upcoming mayor's race, which we'll hear about tonight. We asked Kyle to cover this Denver mayoral election. And we asked him to address the responsibilities of the person who will fill this office in our what is called a strong mayor system. We also asked if he could talk about the campaigning of I believe it's 24, I've lost count as many of you probably have, the 24 people who are aspiring to this office, and how the rollout is going under Denver's new Fair Elections Fund guidelines. So without further ado, I'd like to have you meet Kyle Harris.
Hi, everybody. It's really, really, really nice to be here. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Perlin. Thank you to everyone who's part of this group. It's It's kind of cool to see behind the scenes of the League of Women Voters a little bit. It's an organization I've leaned on both as a voter and also as a journalist at times in terms of the debates you've put on, your voter guides, all of that. So it's really cool to be here and I appreciate it. Like Sue was saying, I am the senior reporter over at Denverite, covering growth, covering homelessness, childcare, all sorts of issues about how people live in this city, who it's for, etc. And because of all that work, they wound up putting me on the mayor's race. And at first, it's cool. It's a mayor's race. This is going to be fun. At that point, and having been here for a long time, I didn't quite understand how powerful this position is and how almost every aspect of our city is influenced directly by the mayor. Not every aspect, but almost every aspect. For those of you who don't know Denverite, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of that. Denverite.com is an online news site. We were formed in 2016. So this is a really exciting year for us because it's the first time we're going to be covering a mayoral race where there isn't an incumbent. So it gives us a chance to kind of establish ourselves in that world. We cover all sorts of weird little things in Denver. If you read us, you'll know that if there's one outlet in town that's going to cover the curb inside of your house or a street sign or some massive piece of policy, it's going to be us. We have a city council reporter. We have a neighborhoods reporter who's looking at all the neighborhoods in the city. I cover growth. We also have a culture reporter coming on who's going to be looking at the cultural life of the city. So feel free to check out Denverite.com if you haven't. It is a wonderful site, and I say that as a reader, a longtime reader, and not just a writer and reporter. So tonight we are going to be looking at a number of those questions that Sue was talking about, including why is this election such a big deal? What is the Denver mayor? And as a journalist, you think, well, I know what a mayor is. And I think as a voter, sometimes we think we know what these things are. And digging into it a little bit more, I found some stuff surprising, and maybe you will too, hopefully. We're going to be looking at the strength of the position, how a person actually runs for mayor, what that process is like, how we got so many people on the ballot. Well, actually, we got so many people on the ballot and how we got so many people running who may not actually make the ballot. Again, what the Fair Elections Fund is. We'll talk a little bit about who's in the race, maybe some of the details, subplots, all that stuff, and some of the challenges we have as journalists of covering such a large field. And also, I think, as voters, the challenges we have in trying to analyze and just wrap our heads around this many people for such an important position. So when we're thinking, I would actually love it if you could in the chat sort of talk about why, if you happen to think the 2023 municipal election is important, why you think it's specifically important, maybe more than other elections, if you feel that way. I would just love kind of some of your perspective in there. Right now, there are 84 candidates running in total for all the races. That is a lot of people to keep track of. It is a lot of people to vet. It's a lot of people to try to understand. For mayor alone, and I hesitate to use a specific number because this changes so fast, but as of this afternoon, it was 28 people listed. At least one of those has dropped out already. Those are people who have listed their intent to run for mayor. That does not mean that they will be on the ballot. And there's a whole lot of other stuff that's going on in this election that's going to shape the future of the city. We've got 2 empty at-large seats that for city council. That is huge. We'll have the clerk and recorder, the auditor, 11 district council seats, all up for grabs. Some of these have incumbents, some of them don't. So in any given district, in any given race, it should be a fascinating time to look at where this city is headed and what various people's visions are for what that's going to look like. I don't see a ton of, maybe the chat isn't showing, or maybe you're not typing, and that's fine if you're not. I never would actually type if someone requested that of me, but hey, whatever. There are a bunch of things going on right now in Denver that make this a particularly pressing election. We're obviously coming out of and or in a pandemic, depending on how you frame that. We are potentially heading into a recession. We have had a housing crisis in the city before the pandemic. It was not helped by the pandemic, and safety concerns are top of mind for people we're talking to. The election itself is going to be on April 4th. For those of you who have been in Denver and know the kind of flow of the election cycle, that might be a little bit jarring. I know in our newsroom it was. If you remember, as voters, we were asked, do you want to push the election from May to April? And we said yes. A lot of the candidates don't actually seem to understand that the election is happening in April, which is fascinating to watch. So some of them are playing catch up from where they kind of thought they were or would be. Okay, I love this. I'm going back and forth. Between your comments and this and your right pro land, this is very challenging to do. So yeah, the election is going to be April 4th. When we say April 4th, obviously that means that's the last date to turn in your ballot. You have till 7 p.m. that night. Other important dates to look at: March 27th. That's the last date to send your ballot back by mail. The last day to register to vote and receive a ballot by mail as well. Not the last day to register to vote. You can do that obviously through the election. And I'm talking to the League of Women Voters. If you all are not registered to vote, well, you might be in the wrong group, or maybe you're new to town. The runoff election is the other thing that we need to look at here, because we are almost guaranteed a runoff election. It often happens in mayoral races with a number of people sure to be on the ballot. The idea that we're going to have 50% plus one required to vote that mayor in is highly unlikely. So the runoff election is on June 6th. So those are the dates. I wanted to make sure I didn't mess them up for you. Let's get into this question of what is a mayor. And the idea of what a mayor is, the mayor is spelled, the job description is spelled out in the city charter, right? In the city charter, obviously, the rules of the city. It's a really fun read if you've not had the chance to do it. The job of the mayor is essentially the chief executive officer of the city. So this is the boss, the person on top. The CEO is really the best way to think of it. And in Denver, we're kind of weird compared to other Colorado cities. We are a home rule city. That means we are both a city and also a county. And that actually means something. And the mayor is in charge of both the executive and the administrative functions for both the city and also the county. The mayor is in charge of approving and reviewing contracts. Every contract that the city engages in should be reviewed by the mayor's staff. If a contractor is out of compliance with the city, that winds up falling on the mayor. An interesting example of this that I recently covered was Denver Rescue Mission had a hiring policy that discriminated against LGBTQ employees. And the city has a policy that they can't do contracts with people who have discriminatory hiring practices. So we ended up writing about that. And again, the contract is with HOST, the Department of Housing Stability. But at the end of the day, it's up to the mayor to vet that contract to make sure they're in compliance. And in this case, that story wound up triggering a whole lot of compliance checks from the part of the Department of Housing Stability. So that's contracting. The mayor also sets the budget for the city, and this is a huge one. This is what makes the mayor uniquely powerful. So unlike the governor, who does not actually establish the budget, the mayor sets the budget, runs it by council. Council has the opportunity to tweak things, but they need a supermajority to do so. And those tweaks tend to be few and far between. So as an example of this, Hancock's last budget was near $1.7 billion. And city council managed to make a $1.1 million tweak to that budget. So it is tiny what council can do compared to the mayor. The mayor, as the boss, is also all about hiring and firing, right? And there are so many positions that the mayor winds up hiring and firing. And we're going to go through some of these. And the reason we are is to just get a sense of the kind of sprawling influence the mayor has. They're the cabinet positions. So that's parks and recreation. If you don't like your locker and how it's working at the gym, if the lines on the pool are messed up, if the parks are littered, that's Parks and Rec. The mayor hires and fires that person. Community planning and development, right? So this is the department that's looking at permitting and ensuring that every project happening in town is up to code. So we're talking about if your fence is over 4 feet tall, you got to go through them. If you're building a giant condo, you got to go through them. If you want to develop the Park Hill Golf Course, for example, you're going through community planning and development. And that group also engages in a lot of the neighborhood plans that you see. Interestingly, last week, Laura Aldretti, the head of community planning and development, was appointed deputy mayor. And that's another job that the mayor has, is appointing. Whoa, all the squares just shifted, and the people I was making eye contact with shifted, which was odd. Sorry. Laura Aldretti just got appointed deputy mayor after Happy Haynes had the job for a handful of months. Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, or DOTI, those folks are the ones who deal with the potholes. You get a pothole in your street, you call within 24 hours, that's supposed to be filled. That's them. They're going to be having a long couple of days with the snow coming in. They are the ones plowing residential streets. Trash collection, all of that comes under DOTI. So a lot of the day-to-day things that we gripe about in our city that bother us or that really please us when they're functioning, that comes to DOTI. There's the Department of Finances, which oversees money and accounting. Denver Human Services, which deals with food, cash, medical assistance for folks who need it. There's the General Services, and that's all this kind of city operations. We have the Denver International Airport, the third busiest airport in the world. The mayor is hiring and firing the boss of the airport. The Department of Public Health and Environment, which includes the medical examiner, public health policy, encampment sweeps, animal shelters, all of that. The city attorney, which incidentally in Denver is the attorney for both the mayor and city council, making some check and balance issues a little bit tricky. There's the Department of Public Safety, which oversees the fire department, the sheriff's department, the police department. And then the mayor's also hiring the fire chief, the police chief, and the sheriff. Then there are non-charter positions. I'm not going to go through all of them, but they include Department of Housing Stability, Office of the National Western Center, the Office of Children's Affairs, Economic Development and Opportunity, the Agency of Human Rights and Community Partnerships, Emergency Management and Homeland Security, Climate Action, Sustainability and Resiliency, on and on and on. Oh, and Arts and Venues, which as an old arts reporter was an important one for us. On top of all that, and if you have not started drooling looking at that list, and you can imagine someone who's jumped into the job of mayor is panicking, realizing they have to hire and fire all these people. There are 700 other positions on 139 boards and commissions that the mayor winds up appointing. This is an enormous amount of power, and there are around 11,000 city workers. So this is the boss of 11,000 plus people. All right, so we've gone through that. I think if you're looking at the heads of commissions and boards, you can get a sense of what some of those things are. They include water, Visit Denver, the Urban Renewal Authority, on and on and on. So basically, if there's something you love about Denver, if there's something you hate about Denver, there's a good chance the mayor's hand is involved in that one way or the other. And that's a lot of responsibility. So Brian, if you could go to the weird list of things the mayor oversees, I'd really appreciate it. There we go. So, if you're looking at this list, it's pretty wild, the stuff the mayor oversees. Pit bulls, right, through excise and license. Breweries, bars, venues, decibel levels at venues, homelessness, on and on and on, scooters, transportation. The list is expansive. There are a few things, though, that the mayor doesn't do, and I think as we're heading into an election, it's important to remember what the mayor has very little control over as well. One of those is running Denver public schools. Oftentimes you'll get mayoral candidates who pop in and they are thrilled because they're going to be able to change the education system in Denver. And then they realize that's actually not their purview. They may be able to do collaborations, they may be able to do after-school programming, but actually working with Denver public schools, that's not going to be their task. Another one is RTD, the Regional Transportation District. That, again, is a regional thing. It is not a mayoral thing. The mayor will collaborate with RTD, but again, not run it. And the mayor also doesn't run RTD's police force. So when you hear complaints about crime on the bus, this, that, and the other, again, generally RTD bottom lines that stuff. And I was talking to Wellington Webb last week, a former mayor, and he was telling me, that one of his big gripes is that the Nuggets and the Avalanche aren't on Comcast. And he's so frustrated with this in terms of civic pride and civic engagement. Again, that's a private decision. Private companies make their own deals. The mayor might be able to push things in one direction or the other, as I think Webb did during his tenure at times. For us as journalists looking at all of this stuff, our thing is like, where do you start, right? Where do you start? Do you start with a pothole? Do you start with the airport? Do you start with permitting, zoning, housing, displacement, affordability? Where? So we do this thing called the People's Agenda, and it's very cumbersome, but it's kind of fun. We go out and we talk to 100 different Denverites. And the goal is to really represent the demographics of the city in that process. And so we pay attention that we're sort of over-representing certain communities to make sure that their voices are being heard. We went through that process, and that's a really good question, Patty, and I don't know the answer. I will get to that later, though. So we ask people, what do they care about? One thing, the big thing, the top thing is affordability in housing. And from what we're hearing since we've done this is that homelessness specifically in that conversation has jumped way up at a level that it's not been in our time in Denver. Crime and safety is number 2, and that includes police reform, police accountability, fentanyl, porch pirates, catalytic converter thefts, car thefts, all that stuff. Education is number 3. Again, maybe not what the mayor is most directly going to be relating to. The environment is 4, health and wellness is 5, transportation 6, mistrust of government, interestingly, is 7. And I think a lot of the work that you all are doing is critical to establishing that kind of trust. So with many of these things, they're in the mayor's hands. Not all of them, many of them. And so when we're thinking about who this person is who's going to be leading the city, we're going to be asking a lot of questions around these issues. There's a question of why is Denver, people often say that Denver's mayor is more powerful than the governor. And it's like a good thing to say, right? But is it true? And everybody I've asked, and the governor never responded to that question, but everybody else that I've asked has said, yes, indeed, Denver's mayor is more powerful than the governor. Several reasons. 1, it's a big city. It's not the biggest reason. 2, the mayor controls the budget. It's not the Joint Budget Committee at the State House controlling the budget. It's the mayor. 3, do you all call it DIN or DIA? I have no idea. I always call it DIA, but I'm old fashioned. So Denver International Airport, again, the 3rd busiest in the world. And I will say from an arts and music perspective, Red Rocks is a massive venue that means something globally. And yes, the mayor is also in charge to some extent of that and the contracts that happen there. So you have this powerful position. You've got to figure out, do you want to run for it? And some of you may be. I'm not. I'm one of like 3 people in Denver who isn't. There are residency requirements. So you have to have lived consecutively in the city and county for 2 years. You have to be at least 30 years old. Within 10 days of becoming a mayoral candidate, you also have to file campaign finance paperwork. And then suddenly you're a mayoral candidate. You're in this list of 28 people. Now, you have 28 people. They're not all going to wind up on the ballot. And this is where it gets interesting. So to get on the ballot, mayoral candidates need to turn in 300 verified signatures. And they had from December 14th through January 19th. So they're wrapping that up right now to turn these signatures in. Those signatures have to be vetted by the clerk and recorder's office. If they are approved and they're kosher, then those people get on the ballot. The ballot order is another thing that's kind of interesting. Like how, let's say we have 12 people on the ballot. How are you going to figure out who goes where? It's not first come, first serve. It's not fundraising. It's none of that. The ballot order is determined by a lottery, right? So literally the clerk and recorder's office has a public meeting and they pull it out of a hat, or they pull it out of a lottery ball thing. When I was talking to Alton Dillard about it, he says they've done it in multiple ways over the years. But it's random. So it's determined by lottery. And then, because we're probably going to have a runoff, the 2 candidates with the top number of votes for the mayor, the auditor, for district city council, and clerk and recorder, are the two people with the highest votes are going to be put on the ballot. The one who is first to turn in their signatures will be the top listing. Whoever was last or second or third goes into the slot number 2. While we're on the sort of question of runoffs, at-large city council is a weird race because there is no possibility of a runoff. You do not need a majority to win city council at large. In that case, you need a plurality, you need the highest number of votes. So you can actually win at-large city council with 19, 25, 30% of the votes. And those numbers are often, somewhere around there. All right, so we went about, if you get to the runoff, you're lucky enough, you're the top 2, the person with the most votes there will win. All of this raises a question for me. I mean, there are a lot of steps here. 300 signatures is a lot of signatures to collect, but maybe not that many considering how competitive this race is. Why are so many people wanting to run? And we talked to them about this. Every person I talk to, I say, why? I mean, this is so crowded. It is a job that has so much responsibility. You're bound to have everyone hate you, even if you're doing a good job. What is the point? For some, they really believe the power of the office will give them the chance to change things in the direction they want to see things change. So sometimes they're good intentions. Sometimes there's just kind of a hunger for power. This particular race is so crowded because it's also one of the races where there's no incumbent running, right? So Denver has a long history of re-electing mayors. We did it with Hancock 3 times, did it with Webb, did it with Hickenlooper, till he moved on to governor and now senator, and did it with Pena for 2 terms before he pulled out on his own. So McNichols is, correct me if I'm wrong here, McNichols, I believe, was the last Denver mayor not to lose a re-election campaign. So that's been since the 80s. All right. So there's no incumbent. Running for mayor also gives people an incredible chance to just amplify their name, right? If they want jobs in the political sphere, a run for mayor is a really good way to get your name out there. And then finally this year, a lot of people think that there's so many candidates because of this thing called the Fair Elections Fund. And the Fair Elections Fund was this attempt by voters to level the playing field between candidates who are funded by big money, developers, whatever, and those who maybe don't have as much money, but have a lot of love in the community. And in some ways, it's been a really interesting experiment. So you have more candidates than ever getting involved. You have candidates who are able to access some taxpayer dollars to run. And they're able to get a match, a 9-to-1 match, right? Up to $50. So if I donate $50 to candidate X, taxpayers will match that by 9 times. That's a lot of money. And it is certainly giving candidates who otherwise would never have had any resources to build their name money to do so. But it also has attracted a lot more people into the race and a lot more noise. Not everybody has to participate in the Fair Elections Fund. There are different caps for those who are participating and those who aren't. This has been kind of an experimental year. So with the election being bumped up or bumped back to April, and with Fair Elections Fund coming through, the clerk and recorder's office has been busy kind of trying to tweak the legislation and tweak the policy as they're running the election. And so city council has been weighing in on things like whether it's fair for all of the debates to take place in, a 2-week time period, or whether they should get a little bit more time. And ultimately council said, yes, we need a little more time. There's also some debate right now about whether the $8 million cap on the Fair Elections Fund, which is the cap that city council established and the voters established, that would be the max that could be allocated in any given election, whether that's enough money or whether they need to renew it and up it with so many candidates involved. It's been a little bit wild to watch all this, but they are actually managing to tweak this stuff in real time. And I'm really curious what your all's thoughts are on those tweaks as they're happening. All right. One of the things I've been doing is I've been trying to figure out how to cover this thing is checking in with Mayor Hancock and former mayors Pena and Webb about their thoughts on this thing. I'm going to be speaking with Hickenlooper tomorrow. He has been standing me up day after day, because he's in that really exciting period of being a new dad. So, mazel tov to him, but I'm really excited to get his perspective on this stuff as well. Everyone says the job is way, way, way bigger than they thought it was when they signed up for it. One of the themes is that you need to be both a visionary and a manager. Wellington Webb talks about really needing to be able to help people in crisis. For him, that was 9/11. For Hancock, that's the pandemic. When things go completely kerplooey and the world is as no one expected it to be, you have the fortitude to stand up there and be with the people. Pena talked a lot about needing to think big and dream big, and that's no surprise considering his Imagine a Great City campaign. Pena was responsible for getting DIA built where DIA is. Initially, he had wanted to build it in his first campaign. He had said, "Oh, we're going to build it at Rocky Mountain Arsenal," and that turned out, as you can imagine, to be a bad idea for environmental reasons. Ended up pushing it way out there. It was known as Pena's Folly, and I've been looking at some of the old press clippings from the time, and Imagine a Great City was a wonderful punchline for critics of the Pena administration, right? They were just constantly dinging him on that. So Pena was acutely aware that sometimes people don't share your vision. Sometimes you listen, you get the best people around you, and sometimes you have to move forward despite public opposition. All of the former mayors talked about how they wished there was more press to be asking more questions. And I'll say, as a person with a handful of people in our newsroom covering this election, I wish there was more press too covering it. Hancock, on the other hand, talked about wanting the media to be more fair, which I thought was interesting in a very active mayor perspective that I imagine Webb or Pena would have said when they were in office. But he was like, "Oh, back in the day, they were much nicer and much fairer." And it's like, if you look back at the press clippings, people were throwing hardballs at the Rocky and the Denver Post back then. All right. Also, all of the mayors that I've spoken to expressed concerns about keeping Denverites in Denver. And I think this speaks to the affordability piece that we heard when we were doing the people's agenda and interviewing Denverites. There's a real acute sense that people living in Denver can no longer be here. And whoever this next mayor is going to have to figure that out. They're going to have to both manage growth, address growth, and also find ways to keep the people who live here here. Lobbyists that we've been talking to have an interesting perspective on this. They are saying this is the first race where there is a sizable and influential percentage of voters who are transplants that have not been captured by their firms. Their information's not been captured. Their perspectives are unknown, and yet they're going to be voting in this election. So there is a big question mark about where Denver voters are. And it's going to be really interesting to see if and how the temperament of the city, the spirit of the city has shifted with some of the growth that we've seen. So again, we have 28 mayoral candidates currently on the ballot. Again, this is dangerous to say because I looked this afternoon and things change fast. We have Trinidad Rodriguez, who's a former city council member and school board member Rosemary Rodriguez's son. He defines himself as a city builder. He's worked in financing. He's done a lot of work in affordable housing. We have David Stevens, who's the founder of the Language School. Former state senator Mike Johnston, who just came out with a fascinating plan and promise to end homelessness in his first term, which I thought was a really bold and interesting thing to look at. And certainly there's precedent for mayors saying they will end homelessness before, and that has not panned out. There's Lisa Calderon, who's the head of Emerge Colorado, which is an organization that works to get Democratic women elected. State Representative Leslie Herod, who incidentally is also an Emerge Colorado alum and celebrated nationally by Emerge. There's businessman Thomas Wolf, who from what I can see is running almost an entire campaign based on enforcing the urban camping ban. And that is his answer to most issues thus far. We have City Council at-large member Debbie Ortega on the ballot. She is obviously a long-term policymaker here. She's probably cast more votes for the city than oh, this is dangerous, what I'm about to say, than most any other city council member. I qualified it, so I didn't get in trouble there. Then we have the former head of the Metro Chamber of Commerce, Kelly Brough, business, and Kelly actually just announced her crime policy last week and found herself in some interesting, I wouldn't say hot water, but some interesting scrutiny, because she said she would no longer enforce the camping ban, much to the chagrin of Andy Feinstein, who owns Trax and Exto and is a big rhino developer, who is like, it can't possibly be true that she doesn't want to enforce the camping ban. So that's going to be an interesting thing to follow. We have business owner and vet Andy Rougeau, who's seems to be really working on a sort of law and order message, and environmental activist Ian Tafoya. Ian's an interesting character. Some of his headlines have been making his way through town at all sorts of community events, participating in food eating contests. I don't know what else you'd be eating, but food eating contests. So there are these great pictures of him like eating bowls of pho and just doing this kind of retail politic. So he's been kind of fun to watch on the campaign trail. Now, there are a few other people who've turned in signatures that as of this afternoon were still being processed. They may have been by now. One is Jesse LaShawn Paris. If you tune into city council meetings and really almost any public meeting, Jesse is a frequent commenter. He's managed to get 300 signatures, and we'll find out soon whether he's on the ballot. Terrence Roberts, who is a really interesting figure. He is from Northeast Park Hill. He's a former Blood gang member who then became an anti-gang activist at a unity rally in the Holly. As he tells the story, he was attacked by multiple Blood gang members, and he ended up shooting one of them, who was also his mentee. He was not convicted of that. The person didn't die, by the way. He was not convicted of that. Began to kind of reestablish himself as an activist during the Black Lives Matter movement, is the focus of the book The Holly by Julian Rubinstein in the documentary, and is an absolute critic of the city. Terrence, so that's interestingly, Terrence also shared an office with Mike Johnston in the Holly at the time of that shooting. So there's some intrigue there if he gets on the ballot between Mike and Terrence. Finally, Kwame Spearman, who entered the race, not this weekend, but the last weekend, much to my child's chagrin, as I worked very hard to break that news. Kwame is the current head of Tattered Cover Bookstore. He has a lot of business chops, and he entered the race late and turned in his signatures, I believe today, recently we'll say, and he may also make his way on the ballot. He was apparently out yesterday. His campaign was out yesterday collecting signatures at the Marade. So that was a fast turnaround. I saw someone asking if you think we'll have our first woman mayor. I try not to speculate because it's a dangerous activity as a journalist and a person who does not take sides in these things. I will say this: Wellington Webb, and multiple people have said this, but so did Wellington Webb, this is a woman's race, and this is the year Denver will have a woman mayor. That is what Webb said. That is what political commentators have told me, lobbyists have told me, many people have told me. There are also a lot of men who entered the race at the 11th hour, which has raised a lot of questions, like what is wrong with the other mob of people who are running, right? Like, why would you enter when you have such qualified candidates? People have been asking that question quite a lot. And I think it's a really interesting question. Do I think we'll have our first woman mayor? Personally, and I'll just step out on a limb, I would be surprised if we did not. That's what I'd say. Though stranger things have happened. Denver mayor races are very hard to predict. The other thing that's happening in this race, and I love it, is that we're at this pivotal time in our city where I think that there is a need for vision. And so there are a lot of people looking back to Federico Pena and his race and sort of fancying themselves kind of dark horse candidates who are going to come in from the wings with low name recognition like he did, present this compelling vision for the city and win. And so there are a lot of candidates. They're establishment candidates, right? Who have extraordinary funding behind them. They have big name backers, they have lobbyists, they have independent expenditure committees, all of that. But then there are a lot of candidates who are very compelling, who are also fairly unknown. And that's making the dynamic of this one, and also how the Fair Elections Fund play out in this one, really interesting. Debbie Ortega, I think, is fascinating because she has, with so many votes in office, she has a track record to go back and look at, see what worked, see what didn't, and it's going to be fascinating to see that play out. We have a lot of problems as journalists, right? In general, I'll say that our field has been struggling. I think that there is a diversity of media that's really exciting right now, and outlets. I love that question, Patty. Who would the developers like to see as mayor? We'll get to that in a bit. We have to figure, we get in a dangerous thing when you have a field with 28 candidates, because we can't cover them all adequately. And then we have to kind of figure out, who are we going to pay the most attention to, right? Who has the greatest chance, who is viable? And these are very dangerous, troubling things that as an individual, I just struggle with. So things that historically we've looked at are funding. Fair Elections Fund makes that kind of interesting because it does actually level the playing field a little bit. There's name recognition, and there's also kind of looking at what kind of contributions people have made to the city. Do people know who this person is? Even if they're unknown, what have they done, right? So those are things we're looking at as we figure this out. And we're not going to be starting our deep investigations and vetting until we know exactly who's on the ballot. And that's going to be a starting point. But even then, it's going to be such a large field, it's going to be a challenge. So I'm very curious about your all's thoughts on kind of what you would like to see from press covering such a large, sprawling group of people. And maybe what your thoughts are in terms of the ethics of all that. Finally, as voters, I think we have a big challenge here. Like, how do we make an informed pick? Some people have more name recognition than others. Emerge Colorado, before Lisa Calderon got in the race, had put out a poll. According to that poll, Denver is ready for a woman mayor. That was clear. Debbie Ortega, Leslie Herod, Lisa Calderon were toward the top of that list in terms of name recognition. So the men in the race did not have much name recognition, and that included a few who didn't get in that people thought might, including Paul Pazin. So really, at this point, I think we as voters have to figure out, how do we make an informed pick? I think there are voter guides. I think there's what you all do. There's what we do. But I am very, very curious and concerned about how we, as people who are hiring essentially the next boss of the city, can keep all this in our brains. And as a journalist, it's puzzling. As a voter, it's puzzling. And that's one of the things I'd love to hear from you all, is how. And ranked choice voting came up earlier, which I think is a wonderful, wonderful question. We don't have it in Denver. It's not happening. I haven't read all the comments on ranked choice voting in here. With this many candidates, it certainly would be an intriguing possibility. And I'd also love to hear your thoughts on that. So maybe this would be a good time to do Q&A. Does that work?
Sure. Yeah, that'd be fine. People can put them into the chat. I think there were a couple, but I think that you answered most of those, except for how many staff members in the mayor's office, right? And
I can write them right now and ask. They're very fast to get back to me over there.
Oh, how funny. Kay Shaw was saying that a good question to ask potential candidates is the amount of people someone has supervised. What personal responsibilities did that person have related to budgets in the former job?
Absolutely. We're working right now on a questionnaire for all of the candidates. And that was definitely one of the ones that we put on there, because it is, when you think of being the boss of 11,000 plus people, and that number may be low, it's a weighty responsibility. So for some, it brings up questions for voters. If someone has never managed someone, should they be mayor? If they've managed 10 people, should they be mayor? If they've, it's a tough set of questions, but an interesting one. And is this strong mayor system even one that everyone wants, right? There are many people who object to it.
So Cindy was hoping that a new mayor would audit the top management salaries to check if they're comparable to other cities.
That's a great question. Yes, and I know I'm looking at that question right now. Yeah. That is actually a really, really interesting. I'm going to write that down for our questionnaire because I would like to know what their thoughts are on pay. That's great.
I think it's a good one too.
Yeah.
Pearl Ann, this is Kay. Mine was
Sure.
more a question of how would Kyle ask that question? That's mine was. Mine is more how would you ask the question about experience and budget? I'm thinking because we as the league might interview people and we want to. So I'm asking you how you would do that.
Oh, great. The way I asked Leslie Herod this the other day was really bluntly, which is, I don't see a lot of executive leadership in your resume. Like what is the largest number of people that you've supervised? Walk me through your managerial experience. Those were kind of the two questions there. And I think talk about the largest budget that you've overseen. What struggles have you had in doing that? What's been surprising in that process? I always love the surprise question. What surprised you about managing that many people? Or what would they say about you is the other question I had for her. And she said under 20, which I thought was interesting, but under 20 could mean 1 or 20. I don't, or 19. I don't know what under 20 means really. So we have more follow-ups there, and we're actually going to be asking for very specific numbers in our questionnaire, I think.
The league, actually, League of Women Voters of Denver and Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation and Channel 8 do Denver Decides. And so we're actually collecting questions because we'll have a mayoral forum for however many are on. We're set for 28 at this point. So it's actually a very useful thing for us right now.
Oh,
so is anyone running a reproductive justice supporter?
People are mentioning reproductive justice as part of their platform. Certainly Leslie Herod has done that. Because it is a federal and state issue largely, I think people are generally shying away from it unless they can address how they would engage in some sort of collaborative or innovative local strategy. So it's not been one of the most talked about issues. And when it has been, it's very unclear to me how that issue actually ties to city policy. And it's one of the things that I really want those candidates to elaborate on. What is their vision for making Denver a responsive city to whatever their policy might be?
Question of who do you think would be the biggest contrast to Mayor Hancock?
Well, there are a lot of big contrasts to Mayor Hancock in this field. And again, with 28 people, it's hard to decide which one. I mean, Jesse Paris, who shows up every week at city council and rants and rails, calls names, all sorts of stuff, would definitely be the biggest contrast to Hancock's consensus building and very warm, chummy style. Politically, he would also be very different than Hancock. In terms of, it's a really interesting question because it depends on what part of Hancock you're talking about. Are you talking about his political style or his policies? And those are really different things. There are people with different politics, like an Ian Tafoya, fairly different politics than Michael Hancock, who I think of a similar sort of charming, glad-handing nature and are weirdly politically similar. Yeah.
How about the developer question again? You want to?
Oh yeah, who? Well, right now, the common line of thinking on this that I'm hearing is that Kelly Brough is the developer's favorite because of her connections to the Metro Chamber of Commerce. Now, that said, when she did say she would, she brought Denise Mays from the ACLU onto her campaign as a serious policy advisor. Denise has been an opponent of the urban camping ban. So when she came out and said she would not be supporting the urban camping ban, that definitely ruffled feathers in the development community and the lobbyist community that's tied to the development community. So I think that, what I'm hearing is they may also be shopping around a little bit for an alternative depending on how she pans out. And I don't know. I don't know how serious they are. And I think from her response after Ben Marcus with Colorado Public Radio did a little bit more digging into whether she actually wanted to get rid of the camping ban, it was pretty unclear what she was proposing that was different than a camping ban. She said, we will tell people they cannot camp, which seems like a ban to me. I don't know. Yeah. The developers also have candidates that they're very much nervous about, I would say. And the ones that I've heard from them, Lisa Calderon, there's a long list of them. Leslie Herod, as I understand it, there's some pretty serious campaigns, sort of behind the scenes things going on to take her down by any means necessary from lobbyist types. They are doing a lot of research into her. Yeah, so they're candidates that I think are seen more as greater threats to that community and probably lesser threats.
We had a question on your take on the two candidates for auditor. Have you paid any attention to that yet?
Yes, there should be a third candidate, right?
Could be, I don't know.
So unless O'Brien has backed out, there was rumor that O'Brien was going to back out as auditor and run for mayor, which as far as I know, again, you have to look at this spreadsheet like every few minutes. As far as this afternoon, he had not done that. It's interesting. I've not followed that race closely and probably should not speak to it too much beyond that. But I do think O'Brien has been weighing a mayoral race.
Interesting. So it does tie into the mayoral race too, huh?
It does tie into it. And so Eric Clark, I think, is kind of the opponent to the current auditor's direction. And the other fellow running, whose name is completely out of my head, embarrassingly, comes from within the auditor's office and has actually been a colleague, like a pretty close collaborator to O'Brien, which is what raised some of these questions about what O'Brien's next move was. But as far as we can tell, that has not happened. So I'm trying to find that person's name, which is, I should have brought this.
Yeah,
I'll bring it up in just a moment.
Yeah, if I wasn't doing the Zoom, I probably could, because I've been on it a bunch too for the Denver Decides thing. There's quite a few things in here, longer ones that people have written about things. Public safety is something that we've been studying as the league. And so we would like to hear about perspectives on public safety, criminal justice, equity, equality, and fairness, public safety as public health, and candidates' point of view on this.
Absolutely. So I am not at this point going to try to sum up every candidate's perspectives, because some of those are still being released, but here's what I will do. I think every candidate has something to say about public safety, something to say about crime in Denver. They want to make this the safest city in the country. And I think that as voters and as in this case, as journalists, what we have to, and you all, when you're hosting your debates, you have to get specific on this stuff, right? What do you actually mean? What is your plan? How does your plan differ from Hancock's plan? What do you like about that plan? What do you not like about that plan? Examples where I'm hearing it come up a lot. A lot of people want to talk about liking the STAR program and the co-responder program that brings, people who aren't law enforcement to certain crisis calls. People love that. But people don't have a great sense of like where those people are showing up, should be showing up, the size of that program, what kinds of calls they really want to see. STAR responders showing up to versus law enforcement. So you hear STAR get thrown around a lot, but I want to know what the specifics are. Like, what do you actually think about this program? Police accountability, right? There was obviously in 2020, there was a huge conversation in our city, demonstrations, everything around police accountability. Well, people will give lip service to that, but specifically, what does that look like? And what does that look like when you're the boss? When, essentially, if there's a police misconduct incident, you as the mayor might as well be the person who created that incident, right? And depending on the mayors you talk to, some the buck stops with them, and they have come out and they've made apologies in an excessive force case. Other mayors have tried to hide from it or shoved it off on the force and kind of distanced themselves, ignoring the fact that like those are their workers, right? So there are questions about police accountability that I want to know about. Fentanyl, there was the fentanyl bill at the State House. You had Leslie Herod and Alex Valdez were on opposite sides of that conversation. It's going to be really interesting to see if Valdez gets on the ballot, how that debate plays out. Regardless of your thoughts on harm reduction, I want to know where candidates stand on harm reduction policies. Where do they stand on things like a safe injection site? That is one of these things that I've heard people from all corners, all political sides of our city really think critically about, whether they agree with it or not, in terms of some of the issues that we're facing right now with public drug use. So again, the more specific those questions get, I think the better. And the less we can just sort of lean on, well, Denver was once a safe city and now it's not, and I'm going to turn that around. How? I want to know how. So I don't know. I'm going to quit ranting on that point, but there are so many platitudes on that and on affordable housing and affordability. It's like, show me the specific plan and how it's going to work. And I think for all of us who are invested in seeing the best person get this job, we need to see policy, right? It's not enough to be a great glad hander. It's not enough to be to have high name recognition or even a track record. I want to see your policy and I want to see how it's going to work. And I want to also see that you understand the job of mayor and that you don't have some weird delusion about what that job is. And I think that goes for every candidate running for office. Do they understand the job they're running for? And often the answer to that question, unfortunately, seems to be no. So soapbox, I'll get off it.
No, it's a soapbox we know too. When will we know when they're actually on the ballot? I think you might have mentioned that at the beginning, but
it'll be after. So 17th and 19th is the date that all those signatures have to be turned in. And then those have to be vetted. So as I understand it, and there may be like an official date as soon as those are vetted after the 19th, when they're turned in, we will know. So it just depends on how long the clerk and recorder's office takes. But I believe, and now I'm in shaky territory, we're talking sometime next week. We should have a pretty darn good idea.
a good idea, yeah.
Yeah.
So the league as a whole, League of US, has Vote 411, where we have candidate information about candidates is there. And I assume that you will also provide us in Denverite with information. Is there other places we should look or?
So in terms of just finding
Information about,
in general,
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I like to think, I love your all's voters guide and have used it in the past. I love our voters guide, and writing it is a great chance to use it, but I also, dear friends use it. Colorado Public Radio won't really apply for this, I don't think, in terms of the municipal race. For federal races, I would say go to CPR. Other places, Ballotpedia is a really fun site if you're just trying to understand kind of who voted for who, when, who's on the ballot, like what's going on. They do some really good work over there. And then I would say stay in touch with the variety of media in town. The Denver Post continues to produce some interesting political reporting. I think the Denver Gazette is an interesting addition to our city. It's been fun to watch them emerge with all the Phil Anschutz funding in the world, and their op-ed section is probably delightful to some people and riles up other people, but some of the reporting in that paper has actually been really interesting and good. So I would say tune in.
Will you guys endorse like the Post does?
Oh, we do not endorse. No. So we're a nonprofit newsroom. We do not endorse. I wouldn't
Just
endorse
curious.
it, yeah, no. No, we will not endorse. And you all don't either, right?
No.
Yeah.
No, we
Yeah.
we provide candidate forums so that people can hear the candidates, but we do not. We do not. need to
There
write.
was an article in the Gazette. I sent it to you, Pearl Ann.
Oh, yeah,
don't
I
know
will
if you
send
put
it.
it in.
I will now.
And they list all the candidates with their qualifications or things they're interested in. So we'll attach that to the chat for anybody who's listening or for people who listen to this after the fact. Your talk will be posted on League of Women Voters website. The briefings are always posted there. And Kyle, if you will, I generally read the Denverite, but sometimes I miss articles. But if there are particular articles that you think can give us more insight or that you or other people write, you can email me about those and I will send them to our office people who distribute those kinds of things to disseminate that kind of information. Yeah.
We will eventually, and this will be closer to when ballots are being sent out in, I believe, March. We will be publishing a big voter guide with links to all of the stories around the election. So I'll make sure you have that and then also let you know along the way.
Thank you. Pearl Ann, are there other questions in chat?
There's a lot more things that that we would like you, I think, as a journalist, to ask them about. So there's a long list of them. I will copy them all out and send them to you if that's of use.
Well, that would be so helpful because I can never figure out how to actually take the chat and.
Yeah, I'm hoping. I'm saying that,
okay.
hoping that I can, but I have before, so I bet I can. I don't think there are more questions coming in. I don't think, Sue.
Does anybody have a burning question? You can also
Unmute. Yeah.
unmute yourself and ask it in person instead of via chat.
Yeah, I have a question, Kyle, and that is, are you in a position to talk about the Fair Election Fund vis-a-vis the mayor's race? Because it's my understanding not all candidates are opting into the Fair Election Fund, and are the requirements once you're in the Fair Election Fund pretty stringent?
So you have to participate in 2 debates. You have to go through some pretty intensive reporting, and there is a cap on how much individuals can contribute that is lower than those who are not participating. And so that's caused some interesting strife because you have a lower cap in terms of individual donations, but once it's matched, it goes actually higher than I think the 600, and don't quote me on that, but I believe it's 600 cap that non-fair election fund candidates can have. So there are requirements, there are reporting requirements, there are debate requirements, all that's going on, and there are limits to how much individuals can contribute, stronger limits. Does that help?
Sure. And then is there also, how does this work? Is there also a requirement that the candidate get donations of whatever size, any size, from a number like 150?
There is a number, yes. And I cannot recall the specific number, but there is a number.
So if I wanted to run for mayor, I would need to go out and collect at least $5 from, say, 100 people.
From some number of people. And I do
Yeah.
believe 150 sounds right, but I don't want to say that definitively. Yes,
Yeah.
correct.
And I just wonder how that plays against what is typical for a candidate to get.
Well, I think in terms of typical, right, it depends on kind of the caliber of candidate. So if it's a totally unknown person, they're bringing in a ton more money than they otherwise would. If it's a well-known person, it's still going to be a lot of money. And the difference there is it's taxpayer dollars, not their own. The thing that I keep hearing on fair elections particularly is because the qualification there, that number is as low as it is it not high enough? I mean, is it too low? Is it letting too many people get into the race? Is it not Is it overwhelming voters? So those are the questions we're going to have to figure out, right, as a city.
Will
Are
there be
too
a
many people getting it?
post-election evaluation?
So as city council should be. I don't know that they formalized that, but they've certainly talked about revisiting it and that it's a work in progress. Even as they make concrete changes during this election cycle.
Kyle, did you say that there was going to be a clerk and recorder race?
There is, we were saying that there wasn't for a long time because
Yeah.
Paul Lopez was the only person in, but then 11th hour, someone else has entered that race. So I don't know that they'll make the ballot, but they have certainly filed an intent to run.
Okay, just for the record, Lopez is currently the clerk and recorder, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Did I not say Lopez?
Hmm?
Yes.
Oh, I did.
Oh,
Okay, good. Yes.
well, yeah.
Lopez is. Right.
I just wanted to verify that.
Yes.
As I sat in on a lot of his meetings before they decided to move the election from May to April. And my point was, we need ranked choice voting so we wouldn't have to do all that, and it could still remain in May and be an instant runoff and save us lots of money. He said that they had the equipment, they had that capability, but it was too confusing for the voter.
To shift, like the shift is too confusing, or just
The ranked
idea
choice
of ranked choice
voting, yeah.
That's
Not,
fascinating.
he said, but they had the capability in the office. So I just think this is a perfect example of how I would like to vote for 1, 2, 3, and instead of narrowing it down just to one. And so who's running against him? Do you know?
I don't know the person's name. Marcus something.
Okay, all right.
I can.
I'll look it up.
Thank you.
But- Mhm.
Yeah, I'm still in the process of getting in touch with him. So
Okay.
we should have a story about him in the next week or so, at least.
That would be good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sally Isaacson has her hand up.
I was wondering, does the city council have the authority to change to ranked voting?
That is a good question. And I don't know the answer because I don't know what state policy is on that. Assuming there is no state law preventing it, I would believe so.
Does it
But-
have to go to?
What's that? I'm sorry.
I think it has to go on to the ballot to the voters to okay.
I believe it would have to go on to the voters, but they could refer the question. But what I'm not sure if there's something like with rent control, for example, where city council, where there's state policies that sort of interfere with council's ability to even begin that conversation.
Ah, thank you.
I
There
don't
are
know.
quite
is-
a few
so I don't know is the answer.
There are quite a few municipalities in Colorado that do ranked choice voting for their local election.
So then I think in that case, the answer is probably city council could refer that to the voters could decide. But this is a wonderful question for me to explore in a story. So I will try to get the absolute verified answer and I will send that back to you. So I think it's a great question.
I did miss one. How would you rank or grade Hancock as a mayor?
Well, I can't say that.
I was afraid you couldn't. I just thought I'd bring it up as a,
You know,
how would history perhaps see him? I'll have to see. I don't know.
I'm going to take I think it was when Paul Payson was retiring, Kevin Flynn. I asked him, what do you think of his, oh no, it was Paul Cashman. I asked him, what do you think of Payson's legacy? And he said, well, it's too early to really say. There are things about Hancock's legacy that I think are really interesting and forgotten. And I like to focus on some of those. One of the legacy pieces, and we're going to be doing some big legacy stories that I think is really cool, is the My Denver card. And I think Hancock will occasionally bring this out and talk about it. But if you don't know what the My Denver card is, it essentially gives kids up to a certain age free access to the rec centers. And that is a beautiful, awesome thing. Hancock got hit with a pandemic in this last term. So he has faced challenges like no other mayor. We have seen an affordability crisis in these 3 terms that I think is going to be a part of his legacy. He came in really strong in 2011, favoring the urban camping ban. It was a very controversial policy, hotly debated at the time. And 10 years in, it really hasn't worked, right? Like we're seeing more homelessness than ever, more street level homelessness than ever. And there are a lot of arguments to be had about what's going on there. But I think the urban camping ban and the explosion of homelessness in these last few years is going to be a big piece of his legacy that we're going to be evaluating for years to come and debating for years to come. And his handling of wrapping up some of Mayor Pena's great projects is also kind of interesting. The Aerotropolis, right? Remember that one? He talked about this gateway to the city. It's kind of happening, kind of, sort of, yes. So we'll see maybe in 20 years what the Aerotropolis actually looks like and whether it panned out. But there's, he's a mayor who's judged himself, I think, largely on equity questions and raised equity as an issue. And I think there are many inequities in this city that are pretty profound, and that have not gotten better in those years. So I think he's going to be wrestling with that as well. He was.
I have a question about the council at large race. You made the comment that there was no runoff, not going to be a runoff. And does anybody recall when we were making these changes about the elections, was there discussion about the council at large seats, maybe the value that perhaps the candidate should be at least a majority candidate? Or was that just not considered at all? Or is it a problem for anybody if the at large seats, which cover the whole city, are minority elected, less than 50%?
I don't recall that being a major part of the debate. Someone here might remember something I don't. The decision was made decades ago. I think it's definitely worth a re-examination and sort of I don't fully grasp that history yet, and I'm really interested in learning more about that. So that is one storyline I'm going to be exploring. But it is bizarre to have that inconsistency to me.
The issue I remember is not that one, and it may well be my memory, but is that there was talk about doing away with the at-large seats and adding council seats, regular council seats, and we were very much opposed to that. And they dropped that issue at the time. But there may be another issue here too, but that was the one I was remembering.
I do recall that one as well. Yeah.
Anybody else with any pressing questions? And I think you can send those directly to Kyle if you go to the Denverite. And I don't know, Kyle, did I post your email or?
There's that, I can put it in the chat, and I had a slide there that just had the email and the website in case you don't.
Yeah, I'm going to do it right now. Hang on.
Well, we have certainly enjoyed hearing from you, and this has been, and we'll continue to look for writings and articles from the Denverite, from you and your colleagues. I don't know if everyone here knows that Denverite is affiliated with Colorado Public Radio. Is that the right way to say it, Kyle?
I think sometimes I call, well, yes, they own Colorado. They own Denverite. They purchased Denverite back in 2019. And so we have a wonderful partnership. We share a newsroom, we share resources. Every now and then we get on the radio when our stuff is interesting to people around the state. So yeah, and I'm trying to make sure I'm not putting type. Oh, there it is. Okay, good. Yeah. Well, this has certainly been a blast for me. I really enjoy enjoy meeting you and hearing some of your questions, and look forward to reading through the comments Pearl-Ann's going to send. It's so exciting. I will say Denverite, more than many news outlets, I think, other ones I've worked for, loves to hear from community members and get your questions. And if there are weird things in your world that you're just curious about, Denverite loves answering those questions. So it can be something very small, it can be something very big. We kind of care about it all. So just let us know. And thank you so much for your time.
Well, we really want to thank you. This has been just terrific.
Cool.
I know
Thank
we
you.
can't, there are lots of clapping going on that you would hear if you were in person, but then we wouldn't be able to see your mother's beautiful quilt.
I wish I could give you a tour. I mean, I guess I could, but I shouldn't give you a tour of all of them. They're incredible. She is a wonderful quilt collection. Yeah.
Well, thank you again. We've certainly appreciated all the information that you provided, and of course, we know there are lots of things that are going to come up between now and April. It's going to be an interesting spring. And we're looking forward to reading articles. And again, if you would like, if something comes up, please let Kyle know. I see Barbara Ford has her hand up. Barbara, did you want to say something? No. Okay. All right. Thanks again. This has been wonderful.
Cool.
We hope that everyone enjoyed this, and please do tell people about our briefings and invite anyone who would like to come. Again, you need not be a member, and of course there's no charge. And on a night like tonight in the middle of winter, I can't see outside to see if it's snowing yet, but in some ways it's very nice to be able to meet by Zoom, especially in the winter months when we used to have people who couldn't come to meetings because the weather was so terrible. So take care, everyone. Stay safe. And of course, vote. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. Thanks,
Thank you.
Pearl-Ann.
Of course.
Thanks, everybody, for your effort.